The earth had been broken. Cities were in ruins, forests burned to the ground, and oceans boiled with fire. The sky, once a symbol of peace, was now filled with the smoke of destruction. The alien race known as the Zoreth had come, and they had come with wrath. No one had expected it. Humanity, ever the conqueror in the stars, had found itself humbled by an enemy they could not defeat. The Zoreth were ruthless. They had attacked without warning, their ships darkening the sky like an endless shadow. Their weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They burned through the atmosphere, leaving destruction in their wake. What had once been thriving cities was now nothing more than ashes and rubble. In the chaos, the leaders of Earth's remaining nations gathered. A plan had to be set in motion, one that could bring an end to the Zoreth. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. But they would not give up. Earth's military might, though battered, would rise once again. A fleet would be assembled. A fleet so vast, it would carry the weight of revenge. General Rachel Andrews, the commander of Earth's military operations, stood in front of a massive screen, her face hard with determination. The world's top commanders and strategists filled the room behind her. A map of the galaxy hung before them, with coordinates marking the Zoreth Empire. The room was silent as Rachel spoke. "We will not go down without a fight. We will take our revenge, no matter the cost. Our people deserve justice," she declared. Her voice rang clear, strong with conviction. The room erupted in agreement. The plan was simple but dangerous. 900,000 warships, all equipped with the latest human-made weaponry, would set course for the Zoreth homeworld. These ships were humanity's best and brightest, the pinnacle of Earth's military technology. For years, they had been in development, hidden away, waiting for a time like this. Now, that time had come. Each ship in the fleet was crewed by the finest soldiers Earth had to offer. They were angry, driven by the memories of their fallen families and friends. They were ready to face the enemy head-on. Their mission, to wipe out the Zoreth and avenge Earth's destruction. The journey would be long, and the risks were high, but they had no other choice. As the fleet prepared for launch, Rachel walked through the shipyards, watching as soldiers, engineers, and pilots readied the massive warships. Each ship was a symbol of humanity's resilience. She knew this mission would be their last chance to turn the tide. If they failed, Earth would be lost forever. "May we all return as victors," she muttered under her breath. The first warship ignited its engines, followed by the rest of the fleet. One by one, the ships lifted off, leaving Earth's atmosphere and entering the cold, dark void of space. The journey ahead would take weeks, but their mission was clear. Revenge, justice, vengeance. They would not rest until the Zoreth were no more. As the fleet sailed toward the stars, the crew members aboard each warship stood at their posts, silent but resolute. They were more than soldiers. They were the last hope for humanity. And with that, the greatest battle in human history began. The warships soared through the cold darkness of space, each one a tiny flicker against the vast, endless backdrop of stars. The engines of 900,000 ships hummed together in a low, powerful chorus, a sound that vibrated through the bones of every soldier on board. They were all part of something much bigger than themselves now, part of Earth's final stand. General Rachel Andrews stood on the bridge of the flagship, Vanguard, watching the ships depart one by one. Her face was stone cold, her eyes fixed on the glowing map ahead of her. It showed the route to the Zoreth Empire, a journey that would take them weeks. Every minute felt like an eternity, but there was no turning back. There was only forward. Beside her, Commander Mark Reynolds, her trusted second-in-command, stood quietly, reading reports from the fleet. His usual confident demeanor was absent today, replaced by a tense quiet. He had seen the destruction caused by the Zoreth. He had watched as whole cities were reduced to ashes. The pain of those memories was with him, just like it was with every person on this mission. Revenge was all they had left. "How are the crews holding up?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking the silence. "They're anxious," Mark replied. "Nervous. A lot of them are young. This is their first battle. They don't know what they're up against, but they're ready. They know what's at stake." Rachel nodded. She had heard the same reports from every commander. The warships were full of new recruits, soldiers who had only trained for this moment, soldiers who had lost everything in the attacks. They were ready to fight, ready to avenge the people they loved. But Rachel wasn't so sure they were ready for what lay ahead. "The longer we wait, the more time the Zoreth have to prepare," Mark continued. "We need to make a move soon, or we risk losing everything." Rachel glanced at the map again. The distance to the enemy fleet seemed endless, each light year stretching out in front of them like a never-ending road. But there was no turning back now. Every second that passed brought them closer to their goal. Every minute that ticked away felt heavier. Meanwhile, on the lower decks, the soldiers were getting ready. In the mess halls, the crew members gathered around, trying to distract themselves from the nerves that gripped them. Some played cards, others talked about their families back on Earth. But it was hard to ignore the cold, looming fear that surrounded them all. They were about to face an enemy they barely understood, and they didn't know if they were strong enough to defeat them. In the hangar bay, fighter pilots ran through their final checks. The small, nimble fighter ships would be the first to engage when they arrived at the Zoreth Empire. These pilots had trained for years, but now, as the moment approached, even they couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Some pilots whispered prayers, others simply stared out into the dark void, waiting. On the Vanguard, Rachel felt the weight of her command like never before. She had trained her entire life for this moment, but now, with everything on the line, the reality of what they were about to face was starting to sink in. She couldn't help but wonder if they were truly prepared for the scale of the battle ahead. The fleet moved steadily onward, its engines blazing a path through the stars. The journey was long, and the silence of space only amplified the tension inside the ships. Every soldier, every officer, and every pilot knew one thing: this was their only chance. They either succeeded or humanity would be lost forever. And so, the journey continued, the fleet cutting through the blackness, toward their final confrontation. As the stars passed by, the soldiers aboard the ships silently vowed that they would fight, no matter the cost. The time for vengeance was drawing near, and they would not fail. Days turned into weeks as the 900,000 warships cut through space, their engines burning with relentless energy. The journey was long, the silence in the vastness of space almost unbearable. The crew of each ship sat at their posts, some lost in thought, others busy with preparations for the battle that they knew was coming. But none of them could escape the rising tension that filled the air. General Rachel Andrews stood at the front of the Vanguard's command bridge, her eyes fixed on the glowing map in front of her. The destination was nearing. The coordinates to the Zoreth Empire were close, and with each passing second, the reality of what lay ahead became clearer. She knew her fleet had the firepower to destroy anything in their path, but what if they weren't ready for the strength of the Zoreth? What if this wasn't just another battle? A voice broke her thoughts. Commander Mark Reynolds approached her, holding a communication tablet. "General," he said, his voice steady but tense, "we've intercepted a signal. It's coming from the Zoreth fleet." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. They had expected to encounter the Zoreth fleet soon, but this was too fast. The Zoreth had to know they were coming. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice calm, but her mind racing. Mark looked at the tablet, then handed it to her. The screen flickered for a moment before it displayed a message in strange, jagged symbols. It was clearly not a human language. But then the message changed to a familiar format, one that they had studied in their communications training. It was a warning. "Turn back now, humans. Your fate is sealed. You will not survive," it read. Rachel's grip tightened on the tablet, her jaw set with determination. She had expected threats, but this was different. The Zoreth had not only attacked Earth, they were now actively trying to intimidate humanity into turning away. It only made Rachel more resolute. She wouldn't turn back. Not now. Not after everything Earth had suffered. "Prepare for battle," she ordered, turning back to face the rest of the bridge crew. "Tell the fleet to ready their weapons and get into formation. We're not here to talk." Mark nodded and rushed off to relay the order. Rachel stood tall, her thoughts racing. The Zoreth had no idea who they were dealing with. Humanity had faced near extinction before and always come back stronger. This time, it would be no different. As the warships closed in on the Zoreth fleet's coordinates, the stars around them began to change. At first, it was subtle, a slight distortion in the light. But then, as they got closer, it became clear. The Zoreth fleet wasn't just large, it was enormous. The ship stretched across the sky like a black wall of destruction. The sheer size of it left the humans speechless for a moment. It was unlike anything they had ever seen before. The Zoreth's ships were sleek and sharp, designed for both power and speed. Their weapons glowed ominously, pulsating with an energy that made the human warships seem like ants in comparison. But Rachel's resolve only hardened. She knew what they were up against, and she knew this would be the hardest fight of their lives. But the Earth was depending on them. They couldn't back down now. "Ready the fleet. Let's give them everything we got," Rachel said, her voice steady but full of fire. The fleet commanders echoed her order, and soon the warships were positioned, ready to strike. The first wave of fighters was launched from the hangar bays of the flagship. They sped toward the Zoreth ships like missiles, preparing for their initial assault. The battle had begun. The first wave of fighters launched from the vanguard and flew toward the Zoreth fleet. The hum of the engines and the sound of the communication channels buzzing filled the air. Rachel Andrews stood firm on the command bridge, her eyes fixed on the display, watching the fleet's movements unfold. Every part of her felt the weight of the moment, but there was no turning back now. As the fighters engaged the Zoreth ships, the enemy's response was swift and brutal. Alien warships opened fire with blinding speed, their weapons cutting through the blackness of space like thunder. Explosions lit up the dark expanse, and the human pilots fought fiercely, their every move a dance between life and death. Rachel's heart pounded as she watched the chaos unfold. Fighters darted and weaved, trying to avoid the Zoreth's relentless fire, but many were hit, bursting into brilliant flares of light before disintegrating into the void. It was clear, the Zoreth were not just an enemy. They were a force of nature. "Commander Reynolds," Rachel called out, her voice sharp but calm. "What's the status on the fleet?" Reynolds, still monitoring the situation, glanced at the status screen and replied, "We're losing fighters faster than expected. The Zoreth are overwhelming them with their firepower. The rest of the fleet is still a ways out, General." Rachel clenched her fists. "We need to change the odds. Order the fleet to regroup and prepare for a coordinated strike. Target their command ships first." Reynolds quickly passed the command, and the human warships began to shift formation, preparing for a more organized assault. The rest of the fleet wasn't far behind, but the fighters would need to hold out for just a little longer. As the human warships adjusted their positions, a strange occurrence interrupted the chaos. On the edge of their sensor range, an unknown signal appeared. It wasn't a Zoreth ship. It wasn't even an object from the human fleet. It was a single, unmarked vessel, drifting silently in the midst of the battle. "General," Reynolds said, his voice low with surprise, "there's a ship approaching. It doesn't match any of our records." Rachel frowned, eyes narrowing. This was unexpected. In the middle of such a fierce battle, an unknown ship appeared from nowhere. The fleet's weapons were ready to fire, but Rachel hesitated. Something didn't feel right. "Open a comm line," Rachel ordered. "Let's see who they are." The ship's signal was weak at first, but soon the comms cleared. A face appeared on the screen, a human face, but not one Rachel had ever seen before. The man was older, with deep lines across his face, his eyes tired but alert. He was alone on the ship, surrounded by shadows. "I am Captain Thomas Drake," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "And you're going to need my help." Rachel blinked in disbelief. "Help? You're a human." "Yes, General. I was part of the first Earth expedition to the stars. My ship was lost, but I survived. I've been waiting for this moment." Rachel's mind raced. What was he talking about? The first Earth expedition had been lost for decades, thought to have been wiped out long ago. And yet here he was, a survivor, and somehow he was offering help. Before she could respond, the strange ship moved forward, its engines humming with quiet power. The surrounding Zoreth ships ignored it, as though it wasn't there. The captain's ship moved with an eerie calm, as if it was something more. "General, I suggest you don't waste any more time," Captain Drake said. "I can help you turn this battle around, but you need to trust me." Rachel stood frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. There was no time to question how or why this ship had appeared. The Zoreth were closing in, and the human fleet was struggling. The captain was offering them a chance that might be their only hope. "All right," she said, her voice resolute. "We'll work together, but you explain everything later." The captain's face softened for a moment, and then he nodded. The unknown ship slowly aligned with the fleet, as if it had been waiting for this very moment. Something told Rachel that this ship, was about to change everything. Captain Thomas Drake's ship had joined the human fleet, but questions lingered in the minds of those who had just encountered him. Who was he? Where had he come from? And why had he waited so long to reveal himself? As the warships regrouped for their next move, Rachel Andrews stood on the Vanguard's bridge, staring at the strange ship that had appeared out of nowhere. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Sleek, smooth, and far more advanced than any Earth vessel. But Rachel couldn't afford to dwell on questions. The battle was still raging outside, and their enemy, the Zoreth, wasn't going to wait for answers. They had to act quickly. "Captain Drake," Rachel called, her voice steady but firm. The screen on the command bridge flickered, and Drake's face appeared again. This time, the background behind him was darker, more industrial, as if he were in a different part of his ship. "I'm here, General," he said, his voice calm but carrying a note of urgency. "I'm sure you have questions, but there's no time. We need to move quickly, or you'll lose more of your fleet." Rachel nodded, her mind focused. She had to trust him, for now. "What do you have for us?" she asked. Drake paused, then spoke with certainty. "I have the key to ending this war, but first, you need to know something. The Zoreth you're fighting aren't just invaders. They were once human, just like us." Rachel felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean? How is that possible?" Drake's expression darkened. The Zoreth were part of an early Earth exploration mission, an expedition launched before the Great Collapse. They were sent out to explore distant stars, but something went wrong. They were stranded on a distant planet, cut off from the rest of humanity. Over time, they evolved, their bodies changing in ways we can't fully understand. But their anger toward Earth, toward humanity, has only grown stronger over the centuries. Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Zoreth were human. How could that be? How could they have turned into this cold, vengeful race? Drake continued. "I was part of a mission to find them. We thought we were rescuing survivors, but we were wrong. They had become something else, something far beyond anything we knew. When Earth abandoned them, they changed. They wanted nothing more than to make us pay." Rachel's mind raced. "So they're not just alien invaders. They're our own people." "Yes," Drake replied. "But the truth is, they don't see themselves that way anymore. They have no memory of Earth as we know it. They're a new race now, one that sees humanity as weak and inferior." Rachel's fists clenched. The weight of this revelation was almost too much to bear. Her mind flashed back to the Zoreth's attack on Earth, the destruction, the lives lost. The thought that these beings, these monsters, had once been human made the pain even worse. Drake's voice brought her back to the present. I have a weapon, something that can stop them. It's hidden on a planet, one you won't find on any map. But you'll need to trust me. The weapon will neutralize their fleet's power, but we have to get to it before they launch their final assault on Earth. Rachel took a deep breath, her mind already calculating the risks. Where do we find it? Drake gave her the coordinates. The planet was far off their current path, hidden in an uncharted corner of space. It would take time, but it was their only shot. If they didn't act now, the Zorath would destroy what was left of humanity. General, Drake said, his voice steady, this is your chance to end the war. The choice is yours. Rachel looked out at the battle unfolding before her. She knew they couldn't win by fighting alone. They had to make this risky move. She turned back to the crew on the bridge, her voice firm. We go after the weapon. Prepare the fleet for a detour. We're taking the fight to them. The crew moved quickly, relaying orders and recalculating their course. Time was running out, but this was humanity's last chance to save Earth. If they didn't succeed, there would be nothing left to fight for. The decision had been made. General Rachel Andrews had ordered the fleet to change course. The barren planet stretched out before them, a cold, lifeless expanse. The fleet had landed, and the soldiers were now trekking toward the ruins that Captain Drake had mentioned. Rachel Andrews led the way, her boots crunching against the rocky ground, her mind focused on the mission. They had to find the weapon. There was no time to waste. The air was thin and the wind howled across the landscape, carrying with it a chill that made the soldiers pull their collars tight around their necks. The ruins stood in the distance, an ancient structure barely visible against the horizon. As they approached, Rachel could feel a sense of unease settle over her. There was something about this place, something unsettling, like it was holding a secret. Captain Drake's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. You're close now. The weapon is hidden inside the central chamber. But be careful. This place is ancient, and it was built to protect what's inside. Rachel's eyes narrowed. She had no idea what to expect, but the urgency in Drake's voice made it clear that they were walking into something far bigger than they realized. The Zorath were still out there, hunting them. They couldn't afford to be distracted, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something else awaited them on this desolate planet. They reached the entrance to the ruins. The stone archway was massive, its surface worn by time, yet the carvings along the walls remained sharp, untouched by the centuries. Rachel's heart raced as they entered, her eyes scanning the darkened interior. The air inside was stale, and the walls seemed to pulse with an eerie, forgotten energy. It's right ahead. Drake's voice guided them, calm despite the rising tension. Move quickly. The soldiers spread out, moving carefully through the corridors. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls, and Rachel's pulse quickened. Every corner felt like it could hide something, an enemy, a trap, or something far worse. As they reached the central chamber, Rachel felt a strange energy in the air. The room was massive. The ceiling high above them, its surface covered in glowing symbols. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it rested an object, something that didn't belong. It was a weapon, but not like anything they had seen before. It was a smooth metallic cylinder, pulsating with a strange otherworldly light. It seemed to hum with power. This is it, Rachel whispered. This is what we came for. But as she moved closer, something strange happened. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls seemed to shift. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and a low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the room, deep and ancient, as though it came from the very stones themselves. Why do you seek what should not be yours? Rachel froze, her eyes scanning the room. The voice was not from Drake, and it wasn't from any of her crew. It was something else, something powerful, something older than anything they had ever encountered. The voice spoke again, its tone heavy with sorrow. You do not understand. The weapon you seek is not a tool of victory. It is a tool of destruction, one that can change the fate of all things. And once it is used, there is no going back. Rachel's mind raced. What was this weapon? Why was it hidden here? What was it really capable of? It must not be unleashed, the voice warned. The Zoreth you fight are not the only ones who have changed. You, too, will change if you use it. Your victory will come at a price. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She had expected a weapon, something to destroy the Zoreth, to give humanity a chance at survival. But this was something else. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force that could alter everything. Could they use it and still remain human? Could they face the consequences? Drake's voice cut through the growing tension. General, you have to make a choice. This is our only chance. The Zoreth will not wait. Rachel stood frozen, torn between the choice of using the weapon and risking everything. She had no way of knowing what would happen if they unleashed its power. But one thing was certain. The Zoreth were coming, and they wouldn't stop until Earth was destroyed. With a deep breath, Rachel made her decision. She stepped forward, reaching out for the weapon. It hummed with energy, as if it were alive, waiting for her touch. She couldn't hesitate any longer. Earth was depending on them. Rachel stood in the center of the ancient chamber, her fingers hovering just above the strange weapon on the pedestal. It was pulsing with an energy that felt almost alive. The eerie voice that had warned them earlier still echoed in her mind, a reminder of the immense power and the cost that came with using it. The Zoreth were coming, relentless and merciless. But this weapon, it could destroy them, or it could destroy everything. The air in the chamber was thick with tension, the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She glanced at her crew, each of them waiting for her to make the call. Commander Mark Reynolds stood nearby, his face tense with uncertainty, but his eyes were clear. He knew as well as she did that time was running out. General, Mark said, his voice steady, though Rachel could hear the strain in it. We don't have much time. The Zoreth are getting closer. If we don't use this weapon, we won't have a chance. Rachel's gaze shifted back to the weapon. She knew he was right. The Zoreth were not just an enemy. They were a force that had already wiped out entire cities on Earth, and humanity's survival depended on stopping them. But there was a risk, a big one. What if the weapon didn't just kill the Zoreth? What if it did something worse? Something that would change everything forever? She took a deep breath, her mind racing. She thought about Earth, about the people who had died in the attacks. She thought about the soldiers who had lost everything and were now fighting for revenge. She thought about the survivors, the ones who had nothing left but hope. Could she really take that hope away by using this weapon? General, we need to make a decision, Mark urged. This is our only shot. You know what's at stake. Rachel looked at her hands. She had always been a leader, always been the one to make the hard choices. But this was different. This weapon was more than just a tool. It was a force that could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. If she used it, there would be no going back. But if she didn't, the Zoreth would destroy Earth. It seemed impossible to choose. I'm not doing this alone, Rachel finally said, her voice breaking the silence. She turned to Mark and the others. If we use this weapon, we do it together. We all carry the responsibility. No one here is safe from the consequences. Mark nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. We trust you, General. We'll stand by you, no matter what. The rest of the crew watched silently, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. They had followed Rachel to the ends of the earth, and now they would follow her into the unknown. The decision had been made. Rachel stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the surface of the weapon. It hummed louder, the energy building, almost as if it were responding to her touch. The strange, haunting voice echoed once more, but this time, Rachel didn't flinch. She had made her choice. Do it, she said, her voice steady. The chamber shook as the weapon activated, its power surging through the room. The walls trembled, and the symbols along the stone floors glowed brighter. Rachel could feel the weight of the weapon's energy, like a living thing. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. She could only hope that they were doing the right thing. The weapon hummed in Rachel's hands, its energy surging through her like a storm. The ancient chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with the power that now filled the air. The weight of the decision she had made pressed on her chest. There was no turning back now. The weapon had been activated, and the Zorath fleet was closing in fast. The countdown had begun. "General, the Zorath are within range," Commander Mark Reynolds said, his voice sharp and urgent. He stood near the door, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding just beyond the planet's atmosphere. "They're launching their final assault. We have no more time." Rachel nodded, her eyes narrowing. The fleet had taken its detour to the ancient planet, retrieved the weapon, and now it was time to face the enemy. She could feel the weight of the weapon, still pulsing in her hands. She had no idea what it would do to the Zorath, to their fleet, or even to her own people. But there was no other choice. They either used it or Earth would fall. The Vanguard's command bridge was alive with activity. The crew moved quickly, coordinating with the rest of the fleet. The time for hesitation was over. The Zorath would soon be on them, and they had to strike first. The fleet had already started its advance toward the Zorath's massive warships, ready for one final, all-out battle. Rachel looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of the crew. They were ready. They had come this far together. They had fought for their homes, their families, their very survival. Now, they would fight for Earth. "Prepare to engage," Rachel ordered, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We launch everything we've got. This is our last chance." The fleet commanders confirmed the order, and the warships began to form up. Each ship, armed with the best weapons humanity had ever designed, moved into position. The Zorath fleet loomed ahead, its dark ships glowing with dangerous energy. Rachel could see them now, their weapons charging as they prepared to unleash their own fury. But this time, they wouldn't be able to destroy Earth. Not if Rachel had anything to say about it. The first volley of weapons flew from the human warships, striking the Zorath ships with deadly force. Explosions rocked the space around them as the two fleets collided. The sky lit up with the fire of battle, and the sounds of combat filled the comms. The fighters from both sides darted in and out of the chaos, weaving through explosions, their engines screaming through space. Rachel clenched the weapon in her hands as she watched the fight unfold. The Zorath were formidable, but they had never faced this kind of coordinated attack before. The human fleet had learned from their earlier mistakes, and now, with the weapon in play, they were determined to win. The weapon began to hum louder, its energy building. Rachel felt the pull in her chest, the way it seemed to call out to her. She couldn't deny it any longer. This weapon, this force, was their only hope. But would it destroy the enemy, or would it destroy them all? The Zorath ships began to falter, their defenses breaking down under the relentless assault. But just as Rachel thought they might win, something happened, something she had feared. The weapon's energy began to shift. It wasn't just a tool for destruction. It was something far more powerful. And now, it was reaching its peak. "General, the weapon's energy is spiking," Mark shouted from the control panel. It's unstable." Rachel's heart raced. They had no choice. They had to use it now, or the energy would tear through everything, including their own ships. "Fire!" Rachel shouted. In that instant, the weapon unleashed its full force. A massive wave of energy surged outward, colliding with the Zorath fleet. The shockwave ripped through space, obliterating the alien ships in an instant. The destruction was total. The Zorath fleet, massive and unstoppable just moments before, was gone. But the weapon didn't stop there. The energy continued to spread, growing more powerful with each passing second. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she realized what was happening. The weapon had not only destroyed the Zorath, but it was beginning to destabilize their own fleet systems as well. The power was too much. "Get out of here," Rachel shouted. "Now." The Vanguard and the other human ships began to retreat, their engines firing in overdrive as they sped away from the chaos. But the energy of the weapon was still spreading, expanding across the void. Rachel knew that they had won, but at what cost? The battle had ended, but the aftermath was far from over. The fleet, battered but victorious, had retreated from the blast zone just in time. The weapon, unleashed to its full potential, had done the impossible. The Zoreth fleet was gone, wiped out in an instant by the powerful surge of energy. The universe had witnessed the destruction of a force that had once seemed invincible. Earth had won. But Rachel Andrews stood at the front of the Vanguard's command bridge, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. The stars seemed distant, almost too far to touch. The victory, though sweet, left her feeling hollow. They had saved Earth, but at what cost? The weapon had not only obliterated the Zoreth, but had also unleashed a wave of destructive energy that now threatened to unravel the very fabric of their own fleet. The power was beyond anything they had ever imagined, and it left her wondering whether the price of survival was worth it. "General, we're clear of the blast radius," Mark Reynolds said, his voice calm but tinged with concern. "But the damage is severe. We've lost several ships in the retreat, and the weapon's energy is still fluctuating. We'll need to make repairs as soon as we can." Rachel nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. She had expected loss, but not like this. The weapon had been their last hope, and now it felt like a dangerous force that could not be controlled. It had wiped out the Zoreth, but it had also shaken their own world to its core. Was the risk worth the reward? "What about Earth?" Rachel asked, turning toward the navigation officer. "Is the planet safe?" The officer hesitated, looking at the monitors before answering. "Earth is still intact, General. The Zoreth didn't make it to the surface. The remaining human cities are secure, and the survivors are beginning to rebuild. The worst is over." Rachel felt a small sense of relief. Earth had survived. The human race had been given another chance, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that still lingered. The weapon was far too powerful, and they had barely managed to contain its energy. What if it had only bought them time? What if, in the end, it would come back to haunt them? Captain Drake's voice broke through her thoughts. His face appeared on the comm screen, looking as weary as she felt. "General, you made the right choice. Earth will survive because of what you did," he said, his voice steady but filled with respect. "But this weapon, it's something that can't be ignored. It's more than just a tool of war. You've seen what it can do." Rachel nodded slowly. "I know. We have to make sure it's never used again." Drake's expression softened. "You're not alone in this. We'll help you, whatever it takes. The weapon's power is far too dangerous. It must be locked away, forgotten by everyone." Rachel turned back to the vast void of space. Earth had been saved, but the universe would never be the same again. The weapon was a force beyond their understanding, and it was up to humanity to control it, or risk being consumed by it. "Prepare the fleet for return to Earth," Rachel said, her voice firm with resolve. "We'll rebuild, and we'll make sure that this never happens again. We won't let our past mistakes shape our future." The crew worked in silence as the ships turned back toward their home. The journey had been long, and it had cost them more than they ever thought possible. But they had made it. They had won. As the fleet sailed through the stars, Rachel felt a sense of closure. The war was over. The Zoreth were no more, and Earth had been given another chance to rebuild.